Sir, I must request that you move back from the ramp. The tone was cutting, designed to ensure obedience. This zone is restricted to approved individuals only. Elias Harlan, 89 years old and sensing each year in his weary frame, held his position firmly. His eyes were fixed not on the youthful officer speaking to him, but on the massive gray side of the battleship she protected, the USS Dauntless. It carried the aroma of new paint, ocean brine, and another element, a pristine metallic odor that stirred recollections hidden beneath 70 years of tranquility. He had received an invitation, he was certain. The document was tucked in his pocket, its material as soft as fabric from repeated examinations. "Do you comprehend me, sir?" the officer urged, advancing nearer. Her badge displayed Novak. She was a lieutenant, her attire pressed to an impeccable sharpness. Her fair hair was drawn into a strict official knot. She exuded an inflexible assurance that Elias recognized well. The assurance of youth who view the world in the harsh contrasts of regulations. Elias adjusted his stance, a subtle grin appearing on his face. "I comprehend, Lieutenant. I was merely appreciating the vessel." "Appreciate it from the designated public observation spot," Novak stated, motioning loosely with a covered hand toward a far-off, cordoned area of the dock. A modest group was assembling there already, relatives of the sailors, community leaders, and maritime aficionados, all anticipating the start of the inauguration event. "This entry area is a secured zone." "I possess an invitation," Elias replied, his tone a soft, mild scratch. He extended his hand into the pocket of his basic jacket. "Everyone has a tail, sir," Novak exhaled, her tolerance already eroded. Another officer, a considerably junior ensign, positioned next to her, his demeanor blending obligation and unease. He glanced from Novak to the elderly gentleman, a mute observer to the gradual clash of procedure and determination. "Unless that invitation comes with a valid military identification or a particular entry permit for this occasion, I cannot permit you to advance." The assembly started to observe. The hum of discussions diminished, supplanted by tilted heads and inquisitive looks from spectators. A minor clash, regardless of scale, was invariably an attraction. Elias sensed their stares upon him, a tingling warmth on his nape. He was not an attraction. He was simply a man attempting to board a ship. Novak's stance was an example of stiff command. She positioned herself with feet at shoulder distance, her hands linked behind her. Every aspect of her form shouted dominance. In her view, Elias was not a visitor. He was a possible issue, an uncontrolled factor in a flawlessly computed formula. An aged individual, likely disoriented, who had strayed from a guided group. A safety concern. "I regret that I lack a current identification," Elias conceded, at last extracting the creased letter from his pocket. It originated from the Secretary of the Navy's department. "But I have this." Novak accepted the letter with habitual indifference, her gaze sweeping it at a pace. That implied she was not genuinely perusing, but only hunting for terms she could reject. "This is a standard correspondence, sir. It notes that you are a veteran. We appreciate your contributions, but that does not provide you unlimited entry to an operational naval craft during an inauguration." She returned it as though it were tainted. The ensign beside her moved restlessly. "Lieutenant, perhaps we could contact the commanding officer's office just to confirm." "Ensign, I am the deck officer." Novak retorted sharply, her voice subdued but delivering a bite that caused the younger man to recoil. "I bear responsibility for the protection and safety of this vessel and its personnel. I will not occupy the captain's communication because an older gentleman is mistaken about his location." She redirected her complete focus to Elias, her tone firming. "Sir, this is my concluding alert. Kindly go back to the public section, or I will have no choice but to summon the security personnel to remove you from the dock." The embarrassment was a gradual, infiltrating chill. It was not so much in her phrases as in her manner, the fatigued superiority, the complete conviction of his insignificance. He was a barrier, debris to be removed prior to the arrival of significant figures. The group's murmurs intensified, colored with a blend of sympathy and grim interest. He could observe devices being lifted, compact dark shapes recording his subdued disgrace. Novak's eyes fell to the front of Elias's tattered jacket. On the left side was a minor faded emblem, its hues dimmed by decades of exposure and usage. It showed a deep blue ring with what appeared to be a silver spear penetrating a turbulent thunderhead. It was ragged at the borders, the fibers thinned. "And what is this intended to represent?" she inquired, a slight derisive grin on her face. She touched the emblem with her digit. "Some sort of memento from your nearby Veterans Association. A gathering token. The contact, the inquiry, the nonchalant contempt. It was a mechanism unlocking something profound within him. The active dock, the shining vessel, the whispering assembly. They all faded for a brief instant. The environment was not noise, but an overwhelming thunder. The primal growl of strained motors battling a swirling dark ocean. The atmosphere was dense, not with brine, but with the sharp bite of gunpowder and fuel vapors. A burst, not from a device, but from a defense cannon on the land, lit the frightened expression of a youth no more than 20. Ocean mist, frigid as frost, whipped against his face, blending with perspiration and dread. His own hand, youthful and strong, clutched the arm of a pilot's coat directly over a matching emblem, fresh and vivid. He clung as the tiny craft pitched, endangering to hurl them all into the icy, merciless waves. The recollection disappeared as swiftly as it emerged, leaving Elias stable on his feet, his vision sharp. He regarded the lieutenant, her countenance a facade of complacent assurance, and experienced not fury, but a deep, sorrowful melancholy. She could not comprehend. How could she? As Lieutenant Novak ready to issue her ultimate demand, a figure separated from the boundary of the assembly. He was a senior enlisted sailor, his features a chronicle of extensive time on the water, his attire decorated with the subtle power of one who had witnessed numerous lieutenants arrive and depart. He had not identified the elderly man, and he did not identify the emblem, but he identified the expression in Elias's eyes. It was an expression of vast endurance, the type acquired only in environments where endurance is the sole element that preserves life. He also noticed the uneasy movements of the higher-ranking officers in the distinguished area who were starting to acknowledge the disruption at the entry. The senior sailor did not pause. He withdrew his device from his pocket, pivoting away from the situation to conceal the communication. He did not contact the security. He contacted the direct connection to the Admiral's assistant who would be on the command center of the Dauntless. "It's Chief Reed," he stated, his tone hushed and pressing. "You must fetch the Admiral. There's an issue at the entry area. Lieutenant Novak is on the verge of holding a non-military person." A non-military? The assistant's tone was faint, irritated. "The Admiral is in a preparation session. Can't the deck officer manage it?" "No," the chief replied resolutely. "That's the concern. The deck officer is the concern. Listen, the non-military is in veteran. He's dressed in a jacket with some type of ancient emblem on it. I don't recognize what it is, but believe me, you need to bring the Admiral here immediately." The chief's senses, refined over 30 years of duty, were alerting him strongly. This was not a basic protection matter. This was something completely different. The observers, through the chief's perspective, now understood something Novak did not. Assistance was approaching. On the command center of the USS Dauntless, the environment was one of managed strain. Rear Admiral Hale, an individual whose profession was as keen and refined as the insignia on his neckline, was examining the event's concluding agenda with his key personnel. His assistant neared, clearing his vocal cords regretfully. "Sir, a communication from Chief Reed on the dock." Hale gestured a rejecting motion. "I'm occupied. Have him relay it to the leadership team." "Sir," the assistant persisted, his tone lowering. He was insistent. "It's regarding a non-military being held by Lieutenant Novak at the ramp." The Admiral's forehead creased in frustration. "A staff matter." Moments prior to a significant occurrence, Chief Reed mentioned to reference an emblem the individual is wearing. He portrayed it as a silver spear shattering through a thunderhead on a blue background. The statements lingered in the atmosphere. The active dialogue on the command center appeared to diminish into a muted buzz. Admiral Hale ceased speaking. His head jerked upward, his eyes fixing on his assistants. "Repeat that." The Admiral ordered, his tone abruptly hushed and fervent. "A silver spear, sir, penetrating a thunderhead." Hale proceeded with a velocity that surprised his team. He advanced to a secure computer arranged on the guidance surface, his digits racing over the input, entering a sequence of restricted entry sequences. He maneuvered to a profoundly stored confidential repository of naval covert activities records. A solitary document title emerged on the display, Operation Sea Serpent. He selected it. An illustration appeared, a reproduction of an aged, manually created pattern, a deep blue ring, a silver spear, a turbulent thunderhead. It was matching to the assistant's portrayal. The Admiral's countenance, typically flushed and assured, had become ashen. He regarded the gathered officers, his demeanor severe. "Assemble my leadership team," he commanded, his tone subdued, but bearing the heaviness of a descending weight. The captain, the executive officer, the senior enlisted leader, all of them. "We are heading to the entry area. Proceed." The officers traded perplexed, worried looks, but obeyed without delay, hurrying to trail the Admiral as he advanced toward the exit. They did not comprehend what was occurring, but they recognized the situation had just shifted dramatically. Back on the dock, Lieutenant Novak's tolerance had ultimately broken. She was unaware of the elevated conflict developing on the command center. All she perceived was an obstinate elderly man challenging an explicit directive and causing her to appear inadequate before an expanding spectators. "Very well, that's sufficient," she announced, her tone echoing with conclusiveness. "I have provided you every feasible opportunity to adhere. You pose a safety threat and you are interrupting a naval event. I am imposing temporary custody on you until you can be appropriately verified by facility protection." She advanced a pace, extending for Elias's limb. "Face away and position your hands at your rear." Immediately, this was the ultimate irreversible action, the moment of irreversibility. Elias did not retreat or oppose. He merely regarded her, and his eyes contained not resistance, but a profound and significant dissatisfaction that was much more piercing than any resentment. He had endured so much merely to be diminished by the unseeing conceit of a youngster pretending in a mature's attire. Just as her covered digits were about to grasp his slender limb, a voice resounded from the summit of the ramp, keen and definitive as a firearm discharge. "Lieutenant, cease." Novak halted, her hands suspended in the air. The whole dock became quiet. The assembly pivoted collectively. Descending the ramp with resounding intent was Rear Admiral Hale, accompanied by the vessel's captain, the executive officer, and a formation of his most elevated leadership team. They were not strolling, they were advancing in step, their expressions firm like stone, their collective status a tangible energy that swept over the dock. The metal impact of their refined footwear on the iron incline was the sole noise. Novak's countenance became pale. She stiffened to alertness, her form rigid with astonishment and apprehension. Admiral Hale did not direct a single look at her. His eyes were concentrated on one individual solely. He advanced straight to Elias Harlan, the multitude of observers dividing before him like a parted ocean. He halted exactly one step ahead of the elderly man in the worn jacket. For an instant, he simply observed Elias, his demeanor one of wonder and deep esteem. Then, with a gesture so keen and exact it appeared to slice the atmosphere, the Admiral elevated his hand to his forehead in the most precise, most sincere acknowledgement of his 40-year profession. "Mr. Harlan," the Admiral's tone was heavy with feeling, yet it resonated across the hushed dock. "It is a privilege, sir." Behind him, without a statement, every individual officer in his group, the captain, the executive officer, the whole leadership team stiffened to alertness and offered an acknowledgement. A surge of admiration. A dozen elevated officers acknowledging a non-military in a deteriorated coat. A shared intake of breath spread through the assembly. Devices that had been documenting an instance of embarrassment were now recording a spectacle of incredible honor. Lieutenant Novak remained halted, her thoughts laboring to comprehend the inconceivable truth developing before her. This could not be transpiring. The Admiral dropped his acknowledgement, but stayed at alertness. He pivoted his head marginally, speaking not just to Elias, but the complete gathered spectators. "For those of you who do not grasp what you are witnessing," his tone resounded, "allow me to clarify. This man is Elias Harlan, and that emblem on his coat," he indicated toward it, "is not a memento. It is the symbol of a group that formally never occurred, a covert activities unit from the Korean conflict, code-designated Operation Sea Serpent. He halted, permitting the significance of his statements to absorb. In the spring of 1952, reports indicated that two adversary warships were readying to depart Wonsan Harbor to assault a U.S. fleet formation. The harbor was a stronghold safeguarded by explosive fields and coastal defenses. A standard aerial assault was considered too hazardous. So a group of 12 men, volunteers from the Navy's demolition specialists, the predecessors of today's elite forces, was dispatched. The Admiral's gaze returned to Elias. They entered at night in inflatable crafts through hazardous waters in sub-zero conditions. They maneuvered beyond guard vessels and port protections, transporting magnetic explosives. They affixed those explosives to the structures of both warships, directly beneath the opponent's awareness. They were detected during their exit. An exchange of fire followed. Of the 12 men who entered, only 4 returned to the underwater vessel awaiting them. Those 4 men preserved the lives of over 5,000 American mariners on that fleet formation. Their assignment was so confidential, it was concealed for 70 years. Their relatives were informed they perished in a practice mishap. He inhaled deeply, his tone infused with veneration. This man, then Ensign Elias Harlan, directed that assignment. He is the final remaining participant of Operation Sea Serpent. The correspondence in his pocket was not a standard communication. It was an individual request from the Secretary of the Navy to serve as the distinguished guest at the inauguration of this vessel, the USS Dauntless, designated in recognition of the bravery he and his comrades displayed that evening. The quiet on the dock was now total, dense with wonder and remorse. The assembly gazed at Elias, no longer perceiving a bewildered elderly man, but a giant of the past, a specter of inconceivable bravery among them. At last, Admiral Hale directed his eyes to Lieutenant Novak. His tone lowered, shedding its resounding nature and turning into an edge of frost. "You stand on a platform carrying the designation Dauntless," he stated, his words exact and crushing. "A designation intended to commemorate bravery against insurmountable challenges. You don the attire of the United States Navy, an emblem of dedication and offering. And with all that legacy under your feet and on your frame, you regarded a champion of that legacy, and you perceived an issue to be addressed." He advanced nearer to her. "Your role is to implement guidelines, Lieutenant, but your obligation is to apply discernment, to perceive the person beyond the directives, to comprehend the essence of the regulation, not merely the wording. You perceived a weak elderly man. You should have perceived a fragment of the very foundation this Navy is constructed upon. Your power does not bestow insight. It requires it. You have neglected that requirement in a remarkable manner. Report to my Leadership Captain's Department at 0800 tomorrow. You and I are going to engage in a very extended discussion about your prospects." The Admiral pivoted back to Elias, his demeanor easing into one of deep regret. "Mr. Harlan, representing the complete United States Navy, I am profoundly apologetic for the lack of courtesy you have encountered." Elias elevated a hand, halting him. He looked beyond the Admiral, his mild eyes settling on the humiliated, shaking Lieutenant Novak. "Admiral," Elias stated, his tone hushed but distinct, "the attire evolves. The vessels grow larger, the armaments become more advanced, but the waves are equally frigid, and the terror is perpetually identical." She was performing her duty. Perhaps a bit excessively, he appended with a trace of a grin. "Don't be overly severe with her. The finest teachings are invariably the challenging ones. I should recognize." As he uttered those terms of mercy, a concluding vivid recollection emerged in his thoughts. The swirling ocean once more, but this occasion from the serene, shadowed inside of an underwater vessel. He and the 3 other survivors enveloped in coverings, trembling without control, their expressions marked with weariness and sorrow for the companions they'd forfeited. Their superior officer positioned before them. He grasped 4 minor, recently crafted emblems in his palm. He placed one into each of their hands. "No one will ever learn what you accomplished this evening," the superior had stated, his tone heavy with unexpressed sorrow. "There will be no awards, no celebrations, but you will know. And we will know. This is for you, so you recall what it demands to be dauntless. Weeks transformed into a month. The account of what transpired on the dock of the USS Dauntless became a subdued myth on the installation. Lieutenant Novak was not released. Instead, she was relocated. Her fresh assignment, ordered personally by Admiral Hale, was to create and direct a new installation-wide instruction initiative centered on naval legacy and veteran connections. It became recognized, ironically, as the Novak Directive. It was a penalty indeed, but it was also a route toward atonement. One drizzly Tuesday afternoon, Elias Harlan was positioned in his customary location at the local Veterans Association, savoring a cup of plain coffee. The venue was tranquil, aromatic of aged timber, outdated ale, and fellowship. The entrance groaned ajar, admitting a narrow beam of dim illumination. Elena Novak positioned in the entrance, attired in non-military garments. She appeared more youthful, diminished, and vastly more exposed without her attire. She noticed him and paused, then proceeded gradually to his table. She was holding a substantial bound volume, the comprehensive record of naval elite operations. "Mr. Harlan," she inquired, her tone scarcely audible. Elias glanced upward and grinned, a true inviting grin that extended to his eyes. "Lieutenant, please refer to me as Eli." She held the volume to her torso. "I was curious if you would autograph this for me." "I'd be privileged," he replied, indicating the vacant seat opposite him, "but only if you'll join and share a cup of coffee with me." She seated, her actions rigid and hesitant. He accepted the volume and a writing tool she provided. He did not autograph his name on the initial page. He accessed it to the section on the demolition specialists in Korea. In the border, he merely inscribed, "For Elena, always remember the mariners, not just the vessels. Eli Harlan." He returned the volume to her. She examined the dedication and her eyes filled. "I desired to express regret once more," she faltered. Elias dismissed it. "You have," he responded compassionately. "Now you're acquiring knowledge. That's superior to any regret." He inclined forward slightly. "Allow me to inform you about an individual named Finn Riley, the finest communications specialist I ever encountered. He originated from a small community in Ohio, and he was frightened of the shadows. And as the precipitation tapped against the panes of the Veterans Hall, the aged champion and the reprimanded youthful officer positioned together, not as opponents, but as two individuals connected by the same organization, exchanging a narrative. One was instructing, and one was ultimately prepared to heed. The account of Elias Harlan is a compelling prompt that champions exist among us, their bravery frequently concealed beneath the serene exterior of everyday existence. If you were touched by this account of subdued bravery and eventual esteem, please press the approval icon, distribute it with someone who requires to learn it, and join BR Veteran Stories for additional accounts that commemorate our nation's elite.